All right, my English teacher friend. So I'm very excited to present this workshop to you. And in brief, what I'm going to do is teach you one of my line of reasoning tricks. So, how to get kids to stay nice and cogent in their body paragraphs and have a good chronological, sequential, logical progression throughout their writing in their bodies, but also dabble a tad with an alternative grading method that's very creative. So here's the impetus for this particular concept. I was hanging out with my 2.5-year-old grandson eating Pepperidge Farm colored goldfish crackers, and he aligned them in perfect little rows like this, greens and oranges and yellows and reds all together. And it's just the way my brain works. I said, oh my goodness, there's a line of reasoning here. We could use Pepperidge Farm's goldfish crackers to teach line of reasoning. And I don't know, my mind just works in weird ways. So that's what I'm going to do. And then I'll show you how we can use these goldfish as a tool for another alternative grading method. So what I'm going to do is walk you through an assignment that I've created for ninth graders and then work it all the way to AP Lit and take a look at last year's Blanco poem called Shaving, and just see how my templates can really help students sustain nice, clear, cogent lines of reasoning. So I'll start with the ninth grade assignment and then jump all the way to the AP assignment. So if you're not interested in this ninth grade business, just feel free to skip ahead to about minute 20 and I'll get into the AP stuff there. So let's dive right in. With my ninth graders, I'm teaching a book called The Four Agreements, and it's written by Don Miguel Ruiz. My district has a heavy social emotional learning component, and this was just a text that I selected to get into some really interesting things with regards to social emotional learning and those developmental skills. And just as a quick synopsis, here are the four agreements. And Don Miguel Ruiz says, if you implement these into your life, these agreements into your life with any degree of fidelity, you're going to be a happier, more serene person. So the first agreement is be impeccable with your word. Second agreement is don't take anything personally. Third, don't make assumptions. Fourth, always do your best. So perfect advice, especially for our ninth graders who tend to be a little bit on the dramatic side and a little chaotic and squirrely. So we had really good Socratic seminars with this book, and it's something that I'm actually thinking about incorporating with my older students, and maybe even perhaps my AP Lang students, because it was really rich for discussion, and my ninth graders did very well with it. So here's the prompt that we devised, and then I'll show you my goldfish idea. In reflecting upon the four agreements, consider how each intersects with your life. To what extent do the four agreements hold true for you personally? In this essay, here's what you'll need to do. Choose two of the four agreements and personally reflect upon each. As such, it's going to be a 4-paragraph essay, intro, 2 bodies, so 1 body per agreement, and then a conclusion paragraph. And then my templates are going to come into play here, even though we're doing personal narrative. My templates can be used uniformly across the expository mode. So those that are familiar with my work, you've seen me do it for literary analysis, rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, and even research. And it does work for personal narrative to some extent as well. And I'll model that for you. So we'll be talking about declarative and inverted theses, proceed through the body paragraph syllogistically, and then stick to the basics of grammar, punctuation, and syntax as you proceed throughout the essay. So those are my basic guidelines for this. So in this writing workshop, I'm not going to get into the declarative and the inverted thesis. I just want to show you the body paragraphs and how to sustain a cogent line of reasoning in there with this goldfish idea. So the first question we ask ourselves is, how do I write the body paragraphs? And as always, we're going to proceed syllogistically. So I'm assuming that most people are familiar with my work at this stage of the game, so I'm going to give a real cursory overview of the syllogistic method. For those that are new to me and my templates, then just hop into my YouTube channel and do a deep dive into all this Aristotelian stuff. I have plenty of videos in there where I go over inductive, deductive reasoning and kind of a historical splash of the syllogistic method. So in brief, the syllogism, as I've already alluded to, is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling. And they would throw out these juicy essential questions like, what is justice? And the philosophers and the students would step to the proverbial mic and they would drop their definition of what is justice. And Aristotle had a eureka moment one day, and he said, aha, I got it. My really gifted orators, those that win the debates, those that make the best points, argue syllogistically. And what he meant by that was it's just a mathematical computation of going from premise 1, premise 2 to a conclusion, kind of like a math equation, simple addition, subtraction equation. So in premise 1, we can say arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclude, my dog is going to die. And you might say, well, Christian, that makes perfect sense. That's cogent, right? And that was one of Aristotle's words, cogency, bulletproof logical progressions, nice sequences of reason as you argue. And even though we're doing personal narrative, we are, in a sense, engaged in argumentation. So the syllogistic method for this particular paper is going to work like this. And it's the same concept for persuasion, argument, synthesis, and research. The first premise, we're going to argue a why reason. So up top in the thesis, all you're going to do is drop your, or in the intro paragraph, all you're going to do is drop your thesis. You don't get into the nitty gritty why reasons, right? You don't put your textual support up there. So you're going to hold your why reason for the first premise. And this is always going to be 3 sentences long. And I'll model this for you a few times. So the why reason. Textual support in this essay is very closely akin to FRQ3 on the AP Lang exam. It comes from the student's noodle. It comes from their head, right? It's a personal reflection paper. So the textual support comes right from their own accord, their own thinking. Conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph is where you make your links back to the prompt and the thesis. You keep your promises of the first premise. And I'm going to talk about that a lot, the promise of the first premise. So a syllogistic body paragraph always, no matter the expository mode, is going to be about 10 to 12 sentences. I don't like those little itty-bitty 4 or 5 sentence baggers that students write. There just doesn't seem to be enough support and analysis in there to really advance the idea or the argument to, any deep fruition. So I tell them to shoot for 10, hard cap at 12. Don't overdo that. Otherwise, you go for bird walks and get waylaid and get very, very digressive and discursive, and we don't want that. So it breaks the line of reasoning. So what we're going to do in terms of writing this essay is align our Pepperidge Farm Goldfish crackers. So we're going to have paragraphs that are all green, paragraphs that are all yellow, paragraphs that are all orange, paragraphs that are all red, right? You want to align your fish in the body paragraphs. That's a very abstract concept. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at a couple first premises. So we have to keep in mind the first premise is a promise. I promise you, dear reader, that I'm going to discuss certain things in my essay. So one thing I do as an alternative grading method is something called think, pair, square, where you have the author and 3 pure editors. And I just put desk in groups of 4. And the author has to identify what the promise of their first premise is. And the editors, once you get into the second premise, make sure that if the student starts with an orange fish, that the whole rest of their essay or the whole rest of their body paragraph is an orange fish. So In terms of how I do this, I literally give my students a box of goldfish, colored goldfish, and the students will glue down the fish to their essay. And the peer editors, if the student breaks line of reason, will glue down fish that are not orange, so the other colors, and say, oops, you broke your line of reasoning. Student can either fix and edit, revise that, or submit it and have me take it over. So it's very interesting, and I'll show you concretely how that's going to work. So this is a first premise. 3 sentences long. What's the promise? And I'm going to put an orange fish next to the promise. There's a basic rule in life. Words create reality. Like anything else that has life, words carry a certain energy. Therefore, if one places their negativity in their words, they can expect to create a negative reality. And the same can be said of its opposite. So, what is the promise of the first premise? Well, clearly, this student is going to be talking about agreement number 1, be impeccable with your words. So, the orange fish is tied to words. We're going to have to focus on language, how negative and positive language creates a person's reality. So our words create reality. So as we get into the second premise, we have to talk personally. We have to offer a personal anecdote about that. So if we're not talking about words, we're going to glue down an opposite color fish other than orange, right? So in the second premise, all we want is a bunch of orange fish. So look at this. Beginning at the 4th sentence, you start the second premise. So let's see if this student focuses exclusively on words. If anything extraneous comes into the picture, then we have a break in the line of reasoning. So let's see. This is personally true for me in reflecting upon my basketball career. In the 8th grade, I told myself that I was too small and not good enough to make the modified team. As such, I was self-defeated and barely practiced. I was so convinced that I wasn't going to make the team that my mind played a looping tape of, you suck at basketball, you suck at basketball in my head. So do you see why we're putting an orange fish there? We're talking about word. We're talking about the promise of the first premise, how words create reality. So see where this transitions. In early October of that year, I went to tryouts and learned the lesson of the power of my words. I did not make the team. But let's fast forward to my junior year. I become much more impeccable with my words, and I tell myself that I'm going to be the starting point guard and earn the attention of D1 scouts. So do you see how this is all orange fish? All we're doing is talking about the impeccability of words, and the student is just going anecdotally. But words not coupled with action are fruitless, because I tell myself now that I'm going to be successful, my action matches my words, and I'm at the gym virtually every day. So it's October and tryouts are behind me. Not only did I make the varsity team, but I'm the starting point guard and team captain. Further, I'm being courted by 6 D1 schools, one of which is Duke. So let's go back to the beginning of the second premise here. So we'll go all the way to the first premise. So we put an orange fish next to the first premise and said the promise is we're going to talk about the impeccability of words and how words create reality. Second premise, we're going to have another orange fish because all we talked about was word and how word creates reality. So we stuck germane to the promise of the first premise. We're pertinent, we're relevant, we have a line of reasoning. As we get into the conclusion of the syllogism, again, we have to be talking about words. So when students submit their essays, I want three fish, right? An orange fish for the first premise, an orange fish for the second premise, an orange fish for the conclusion. So since we're talking about words and we started with words, we have to end with words. So look at this. Conclusion is just a couple of sentences here, and it's in the body paragraph, 10 to 12 sentences. Words definitely create reality, so it's very important that an individual be impeccable with their words. I experienced this firsthand, and the change in my discourse has made a world of difference, right? So little ninth graders can do this, right? It's just simple. Keep the fish in a row. It's kind of like, I think my grandson is is a little OCD. Everything has to be in impeccable order when he eats. He doesn't like his food to touch, and he has little trays, like prison trays, cafeteria trays, and all the food is separate. So the corn is with the corn, the carrots are with the carrots, the green beans are with the green beans, the chicken nuggets are with the chicken nuggets. And when we write, we kind of have to do the same thing. Keep everything aligned in that line of reasoning. Organize it, if you will, in kind of an OCD manner, and stay cogent. So the next question is this: what do I do next? And the answer is choose a different goldfish color and bust out another syllogism and stay cogent. So we're going green fish here. What's the promise of the first premise here? One reason why people suffer emotionally is because they take so many things personally. But here's the thing. Most of the time, the things we internalize personally have nothing to do with us. In fact, it's not about you, it's about them. Green fishes don't take anything personally. So in the second premise, I want a personal anecdote about how this student took something personally, or they didn't take something personally, or maybe both, and how they grew from those events. And then in the end, the conclusion, we want another green fish. We got to be talking about don't take things personally. All right, the second promise, or the second agreement. So second premise begins fourth sentence, and let's go. Let's see what happens here. So we see this is all green fish. All the anecdote is green fish. Take, for example, a recent interaction I had with my father. Ever since my parents got divorced 8 years ago, he struggled to make ends meet financially. In spite of working full-time as a teacher, he holds 2 other jobs, but still struggles to provide for me and my other siblings in spite of clocking 60-hour work weeks. The other week, my 8th grade sister hit my dad up for a school trip to Quebec, a new winter jacket, new sneakers, and the final payment for her braces all on the same day. So what I would tell this student is, all right, you're getting very detailed, very specific, which is nice, especially as we're training kids for FRQ3 for the AP Lang exam. But we got to get it to the idea of don't take things personally, because that is the promise of the first premise. That's our green fish. Clearly, all of these things come with a hefty price tag. I was unaware that he had done these things for her, and as soon as he walked into the door from working a 16-hour day, I asked him for some money to buy a pizza because I didn't like what was in the refrigerator and cupboards. He lost his mind and tore into me about being lazy and entitled. Later, upon reflection, he apologized. In retrospect, his outburst has nothing to do with me. Do you see this? Don't take things personally. So all of this anecdote right here is now going to be tied into the promise of the first premise. So we can put green fish down here. It's all about his financial fear and scarcity mindset. The fact of the matter is that I go to school every day and work 30 hours a week myself. My dad acknowledged this and gave me a hug for being a good kid. And the kicker, we had pizza that night. So it goes on to the next slide. Let's get to the conclusion, right? So the conclusion of the syllogism, not the conclusion of the essay. So if I had taken my father's tongue lashing personally, well, why are we talking about that? Go back to the first premise, right? So it's all green fish. You cannot deviate from green fish at all. If I had taken my father's tongue lashing personally, it would stand to reason that I'd be pretty down on myself and sore with hurt feelings. However, I knew that it had nothing to do with me. He was asked to spend more than his earnings and reacted out of fear and panic and frustration. It had nothing to do with me. So it's all green fish there. So like no red fish come in here, no blue fish, no yellow fish, no orange fish. It's all green fish from start to finish. That's perfectly done. That's a cogent line of reason, right? That line of reasoning stays perfectly intact. It's about 12 sentences long. It's wonderful, very focused, very cohesive, very logical, very well reasoned. It's a good package. And that's how we want our students to write. So again, line of reasoning has this logical sequence in order, right? When we see our little kids do this with their food, it's how we want them to write and put it all in order, put these goldfish in order and sequence. So let's jump from ninth grade, from doing a personal narrative to something much more advanced and complex, like an FRQ1 for the AP Literature exam. For this, as I promised early in the workshop, I want to focus on Richard Blanco's poem Shaving and tackle this syllogistically again. So I'll show you a whole body paragraph, a syllogistic body paragraph, and how to keep the fish aligned, because this is much more complex and advanced than doing a personal narrative. So let's ask the same question. How do I write the body paragraphs? We're going to proceed syllogistically. And then this first premise for literary analysis changes a little bit because we have to use literary terms and devices. We have to remember we're performing literary analysis, not plot analysis, not personal narrative, right? So we have to use the terms and devices. Second premise, given that we have the poem in front of us, is the textual support, and we want to teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing equally. Conclusion, same thing, echo links promise, all going to be about 10 to 12 sentences. First premise, yet again, is going to be 3 sentences long. One of the reasons why I like a 3-sentence first premise is I'm kind of old school. I've been teaching a long time, and the College Board on FRQ1 for the Lang exam has stated for years, your argument must be central. Well, guess what? Even on AP Lit for the FRQs, we're engaged in the act of expository writing. All expository writing is an act of arguing, so I want the argument to be central at all time. If it's not, then we break the demand of the assignment and end up doing, snafus and pitfalls and faux pas, like writing plot analysis, plot summary, cliff note summations, instead of literary analysis. So let's take a look at my first 3 sentences here, and you can see, whoa, we got 3 fish. Now, pay attention to this, because in literary analysis, we want our students to begin to multitask in the first premise, so as to avoid writing 1 paragraph tone, 1 paragraph diction, 1 paragraph syntax, 1 paragraph extended metaphor, right? It's too plotting. You're not going to get the sophistication point. Probably won't even qualify writing in that manner. So you want to begin to link the terms and devices together, see how they intersect, how they interface, how they talk to each other, how they hold hands with each other, how they jigsaw piece each other, and then proceed accordingly. So students often ask, how do I begin my first body paragraph? And I tell them, start where the author starts. So you'll see my students transition with clauses like this, right from the onset. It cues the reader into knowing that you have a sequence and a chronology, that you're very organized. And that's the thing, it's goldfish, man. We're going to put these goldfish in order. Right from the onset, Blanco manipulates his syntax to highlight his theme. So now, as we get into the second premise, next slide, we're going to start with syntax. We need to quote and or paraphrase something about a syntactical move that Blanco makes. We're also going to focus heavy on his theme. So blue fish theme, orange fish syntax. In stacking similes, and again, do you see how you have to use the terms and devices? So the third thing we're going to focus on are the similes, green fish similes. So we need quotes and paraphrases of the similes. He also reinforces the idea that life's big mystery is quite simple to understand. Everything is connected to the laws of nature and the natural order of things. Even his reflection upon his father's life while shaving belonged to this connection. So we're expecting to see a lot of blue, right? This is going to be a big thematic analysis through the similes and the syntax, right? So fourth sentence begins the second premise. Go in order, have a sequence. We're going orange fish, blue fish, green fish. Look at this. Orange fish, blue fish, green fish. So orange fish was syntax. Let's see where this goes. Immediately, Blanco conjoins the first 2 clauses with a comma splice. Sounds like we're talking about syntax. Bingo, we're good. So let's balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. He informs us that he's not shaving, he is writing about it. The comma splice is an interesting feature because it cues the reader to the idea that Blanco is likewise going to connect everything to highlight the gist of his theme. So now we already transitioned to theme, right? We did the syntactical analysis, now we're into theme. The hyphen gives way to a long series of similes, green fish, that show how even something as mundane as shaving and writing are like ocean steam rising from clouds and ultimately the same silent forces that quietly orchestrated his father's life and passing. So we got some quotes and paraphrases for the theme, quotes and paraphrases for the similes. Blanco, with a contemplative and musing tone, is beginning to see that the discrete mystery of how whiskers grow is really the same thread to explain the drink roses take from the vase. Things in life just happen like the bloom of spiderwebs each morning, but all too often one does not pause long enough to take notice of how everything in life is like one gigantic jigsaw piece. So we're at the conclusion. We got to wrap this up. But let's go back to the promise of our first premise. Do we have something to some textual support for the syntax? Yes. Have we dissected and analyzed the theme? Yes. Have we looked at a couple of similes? Yes. Did anything extraneous come into the frame? No. Therefore, we have a line of reasoning. But we got to conclude it all. We got to wrap it all back. In acknowledging his own mortality, Blanco is beginning to see that these simple acts like shaving and writing likewise mark the days of his father's life. There is an intensity to vanishing, but knowing that life is fleeting and impermanent is comforting given that everything belongs to a divine order. And I think that was 11 sentences. So you can see these nice big full body paragraphs are just replete with good analysis and support that those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence baggers that kids write, you can't achieve that in that amount of space unless you're super precise and got concrete precision. So hopefully my little Pepperidge Farm goldfish cracker exercise makes sense to you. And then I'll back up a second. So one of the things my students do as an alternative grading method is they will print their papers, their essays, and glue down their goldfish to their paper. And then I'll read them and make sure that they have a line of reasoning. Through that think pair square exercise that I mentioned earlier, the peers usually can identify if the line of reasoning is broken. And again, what a great alternative grading method. I don't need to tell a kid, hey, your line of reasoning snapped, right? You didn't stay cogent, you didn't stay clear, you didn't stay logical. The peers can do that, right? My guys are so well versed in my template that they can do this all day long and really help each other out. So anyways, as you know, I'm teamed up with the National Writing Project these days. So all of my professional development is going to be offered through them. So if you want to know more about my PD offerings, go to www.teachingwritingcoach.com. So in December of 2022, I'm offering a 2-hour intensive on how I teach line of reasoning using these tricks and gimmicks. I'm going to focus primarily on children's stories, like If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, The Forgetful Elephant, I Forgot My Hat, books like that, to really solidify and shore up how to sustain line of reasoning. And it's perfect for a 9 through 12 audience, even AP and IB teachers. It's very pertinent for. And then on November 12th of 2022, I'm offering my 2-hour intensive on alternative grading methods, and we'll get into 25 of my top favorite alternative grading methods. So all that information is at teachingwritingcoach.com. My Teach It Right 5-week mastermind is now offered through NWP, which is fantastic because a lot of teachers need professional development hours. And NWP is a sanctioned organization, and they can give you badges of completion hours so that you can go to your district and say, hey, I did some PD with Christian and NWP. So email me if you want more information, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. Even if you want these slides, I'll pass them on to you, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. And then all of my gigs with NWP, my consulting, go to my webpage and give that a whirl. So hopefully you found this to be useful and can have some goldfish crackers with your kids to teach line of reasoning. Be well, happy teaching, happy writing.